One of the most easily recognized attributes of being from Appalachia is the accent. Now you can already hear I have a strong mountain accent. People from different parts of Appalachia actually have slightly different accents. If you're not familiar with them, you may think everyone from Appalachia sounds the same, but there's just variations depending on what area that you're from. But I think accents, no matter where they're from or no matter the kind, even if they're not from Appalachia, I just think they're beautiful. I'm fascinated by them. I love to listen to people that have accents. In today's modern world, it seems like people with accents are looked down on, whether you're from Appalachia or a different area of the United States that has a strong accent. But I think they're just amazing that those the sounds, the way that you say the words and the words that you actually use, how that's been passed down from generation to generation in those areas, and it just continues to people easily recognize, hey, that's a girl from the South or from Appalachia or from New York or from wherever. But the only accent that I have firsthand knowledge of is my own, my Appalachian accent. And I've never really felt bad about my accent. One good reason, or the main reason, is probably that I've never lived anywhere but Appalachia. So everywhere I've lived, even when I moved away as a young adult, I was still in Appalachia. So there was always somebody there that sounded like me. So I didn't have to, it wasn't like I stood out. So maybe that's why I've never felt bad about it. But when I hear someone with an Appalachian accent, if I'm away, maybe I'm at the beach or somewhere, and I'm in a grocery store or something, and a few aisles away I hear the faint sounds of someone that sounds like me, it just makes me feel at home. And the reason it does is because that's the accent that I'm most familiar with. I used to work at a college. I worked there for many years. In the first part of my employment, I was the college receptionist. So that meant I handled the switchboard, I directed phone calls, and I also greeted everyone that come in the main administrative building. Well, one day this gentleman come in wearing overalls, an older guy, and he nodded at me, and then he told me what he was looking for, and I showed him where to go. Well, about 20 or 30 minutes later, he come back out, and he stopped at my desk, and I said, "Did you find everything you needed?" And he said, "Oh yeah, they were real nice. They helped me. I got it all took care of." And I said, "Well, good." And he kind of leaned close to me, and he said, "You're one of us, ain't you? Who's your people?" Well, what did he mean by that? He wasn't saying anything bad about the other people that worked at the college. Some of them were native to the area too. It's just that he heard something in my accent that made him feel comfortable enough to ask me who I belonged to, who my people were. Well, in Appalachia, the family and your family ties and community, that whole tie of surrounding the community is so strong that it's like we all have this map in our mind, and we want to know where each person that we meet fits into that. So that's why people often say, "Who do you belong to?" They're just trying to fit you in that map in their mind of the community. Well, as often happens when somebody around here asks me who I belong to, and I tell them, he knew Pap, so when I told him whose daughter I was, so we had an immediate connection there. A friend of mine who grew up in Arizona, she told me this sweet story about an accent, the power of having an accent. So she grew up in Arizona, and her family life wasn't the best. Her mother and father had a lot of troubles and a lot of problems, and she was fairly young when they finally divorced. And just a few years later, her father passed away. He died. So fast forward till when she was in college. So she was in college, and her college took a trip to Kentucky. So she was in Kentucky with her college students from back in Arizona, and they were lost. And she said this is way before cell phones and GPS were common and things like that. So they were lost, and she said they seen a gentleman on the side of the road, and she said, "Well, if you stop, I'll ask him where we're at and ask him, if he can give us directions." So they did, and she asked him, and she said, I almost passed out when that man's mouth opened and he started telling us where to go. My daddy's voice come out of his mouth. I couldn't believe it. I just was spellbound by the way he talked. I had not heard anyone speak like that since my daddy passed away. Well, she didn't know it because she was young when her parents divorced, and still fairly young when her dad passed away, that he was from Appalachia. So she had never really questioned why, if he sounded different or anything. That was just the way her daddy talked. But then when she heard that man standing on the side of the road in Kentucky, she realized, oh, my daddy, he sounded just like this. And then when she got older and she investigated, he was definitely from Appalachia, and he'd retained his accent all those years, so that it impressed upon her that that's what her father sounded like. When the girls were in 8th grade, their school trip was a trip to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And I went with them, and we had a great time, but we had a really interesting thing happen about our accents. So we were actually still in Wilmington, and we were going to go across, and I'm sorry I can't remember the names of the sounds and all that kind of stuff, but we were going to go to see the wild ponies of North Carolina. I'm sure that you've probably heard about them. So it was a really windy day. In fact, it was so windy they had like warnings out for ocean. And on our trip, you just had to go out. The boat went over a portion of ocean, and then it went back into the sound. So anyway, we were on this boat, and we went over the open ocean. We had to all go inside. Nobody could be outside on the deck. It was kind of scary for people like us who weren't familiar with things like that. But then once we got back into the sound, the calmer waters, everyone could go back outside. So it was cool. It was a March, so it was early, and then that wind, so it was a cool time. And me and the girls went around to one side of the boat where there was a bench that went the whole length of it, and we sat there so the sunshine could hit us. Well, we were just sitting there talking and, watching and being amazed by everything we saw. Well, I noticed one of the crew members, he was working nearby us, and he kept staring at us. Well, every once in a while I'd hear him say something to another crew member, and I thought, I kept thinking he sounded kind of funny, and I don't know. And finally I looked over, I whispered to the girls, I said, I think that man is making fun of the way we talk. And so of course we didn't, we weren't going to confront him or anything, so we just kept talking to each other about what we were, whatever we were talking about. Well, in a little while he come over to us, approached us, and he said, do you think I sound funny? And I said, no, I thought you thought we sounded funny and that you were trying to sound like us, like you were making fun of us. And he started laughing. He said, I thought you were making fun of me. Well, then he said, where are you from? And I said, well, we're from as far west as you can go and still be in North Carolina. We're from Brasstown. And so I said, where are you from? And he said, well, I'm from Ocracoke Island. That's where I grew up. My family's been there for generations, and this is the way we sound. And I said, well, the way we sound is how people in the mountains of North Carolina sound. Anyway, we didn't sound that similar, but it really did. It was similar enough to where I thought he was trying to make fun of us, like over-exaggerate, and he thought we were trying to make fun of him. Anyway, when we settled that neither of us was trying to make fun of the other, we had the biggest laugh over that, and it was really a funny, example of what can happen with your accent. There's a lot of stereotypes about the Appalachian accent or the Southern accent. People that have an accent like that are thought to be less educated, which of course is not true. I've been writing about Appalachia for over 10 years on the blog Blind Pig and the Acorn. My name's Tipper Presley, if you've never read my blog or never seen any of my videos. And that's a subject that's often come up. But recently someone told me, a gentleman over in Blairsville, told me this little incident that happened several years ago. Pap died in 2016, so it was probably a couple of years before that. So anyway, my family's musical, so we were playing music, doing a performance in Blairsville, Georgia, which is not very far from here. And this gentleman was part of the sound crew, so he was handling the sound. And he said he noticed some people in the audience, because he was really close to him, that my pap, that he was talking, and when he was talking, whatever he was saying to the audience, he used the word yuns. He said yuns. And he said they kind of snickered at each other and hit each other, and pointed like, look at this old man, he can't even speak right or whatever. So he said he just kind of paid attention to them throughout the rest of the concert. And then a little bit later, I don't know if somebody had asked or pointed it out, that Pap was wearing a hat that was, had a big Y on it. It was a Yale hat. And I guess I don't know how that come up, but in it, Pap said, oh, well, the reason I wear this is because 2 of my grandsons went to Yale on a full ride scholarship. So he said he noticed, he looked over at the people that had been making fun of him, and then he'd seen them kind of look sheepishly like, maybe we shouldn't have been making fun of him, wow, his grandsons went to Yale, they must really be something, which, is not bad for 2 boys who grew up in a holler in Appalachia. But anyway, that was an example of what can happen sometimes with those kind of stereotypes. I've never had anyone make fun of how I talk, unless it's behind my back and I don't know about it. The only people that make fun of how I talk is my husband and my children, because I sometimes say words that are not words according to them. But anyway, those are the only people that I know about. But when my oldest nephew, one of those Yale boys, went off to college the first time, he had never been anywhere, that far for that length of time by himself, out in the big world. And so we were all worried about him. But I remember probably Christmas was because you can't come home every semester or every weekend from, that distance. So it's probably Christmas that year before he first got to come home. And when he did, of course, we all enjoyed it, and then we hated for him to leave. And Granny was really worrying about him and, telling him she didn't know if those people up there would be good to him. And, she just wanted him close to where she could watch him and make sure he's all right and all this. He said, "Oh, Granny, don't worry about me. They all like me because they like to hear me talk." So see, there is people that love, just like I do, they love all these various accents. And so there's some people that really enjoy hearing your Appalachian or Southern accent. Another example of that is here in our community, we have a friend who every year she has kind of a get-together for women and in the community, and we just eat and have a good time and fellowship one with another. And it's probably been 2 years ago when we went in. And she's been doing this for years, so it's it's usually all the same people, kind of maybe one or two new ones, but not really. It's usually kind of the same circle of women and girls. So about 2 years ago, me and Corey and Katie went, and right when we come in the door, I just happened to notice this lady that I'd never seen before. Well, she was beautiful. That was one of the reasons. She had just long flowing hair and just a beautiful smile. She was just lovely. And so everyone started welcoming us in, "Hey, how are you? Take your coat off," all that. And so we were talking to them, and I noticed she just kept staring at us and really, intently. And I thought, well, maybe she thinks she knows us, or I don't know. And so then I kind of started talking, a conversation with one of my friends, and I kind of kept my eye on that lady, and she just kept staring at us, and I could see she was making a beeline for us. She was going to get over there where we were at no matter what. Well, just in a few minutes, she was just standing right beside me, just, smiling at me. And I stopped talking, and I turned around and looked at her and smiled. And she said, your voice is beautiful." So it turns out she was visiting from Finland. And she said, "I've been here a month, and I've heard no one that speaks like you. Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, we're from here." There are other people that sound like us, but maybe you've just not been around them. But she said, "Your voice is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." And she said, "I'm going to stand by you all night just so that I can hear you talk." And I said, "Well, okay, that's real flattering." But so she was just amazed and was just thrilled over our accents. So sometimes, people do. It's not all bad, is what I'm saying. It's not all stereotypes. And of course, those stereotypes are just that. They're not true. Just because you have an accent or use colorful words and phrases and things doesn't mean that you're any less educated than anybody else. There's so many aspects of Appalachian language that we could talk about it forever. I have a monthly Appalachian vocabulary test on my blog, Blind Pig and the Acorn, for those of you who are not readers, who've never seen it before. I also write about language a lot. I'm really passionate about it. It's just one of my favorite things, those words and phrases that have held on because they've been passed down through generations in the same family, and I'm still saying words that my great-great-grandfather said. And of course, I think I said before, if I didn't, language is fluid and it's ever evolving. So there's a lot of words that they said that we don't say anymore, that have fallen out of fashion. Even from when I was a kid, there's words that are no longer said because they don't make sense anymore. One of the sayings that I always think of is when I was little, it was so common to hear somebody say, "Flick your Bic," because that was a commercial for the Bic lighter. Well, today, my children, they would not even know what that meant because they weren't familiar with the commercial and with the lighter. So a lot of times it's societal kind of things that makes language fall out of fashion. But some of the most obvious little things about Appalachian language is that sometimes we add extra letters to the words that don't belong there. So ones that come to mind are like once, we put a T. Onced, twice, the same thing, put a T. Twiced, across, acrossed. I listened for those T's to people, and sometimes people that don't really sound Appalachian, I'll hear that T and I think, you had somebody somewhere that taught you to say it with a T, some influence there. But then with other words, a few more that add letters. So wash turns into wash, they add a R. Rinse, like rinse the dishes, is wrench the dishes. But some words we take letters off of, so we don't, like sitting. Well, all those ing words, we leave the G off. Sitting, fighting, those kind of things. Potato becomes tater. Mater is for tomato. So there's just all kinds of little grammatic things like that. But then there's tons of colorful words and unique sayings that we could go on and on about. Maybe we could do a whole video about sayings. I hope so. That would be really neat. But a few of the unusual words that come to mind is middlin. Middlin means bacon. Leather breeches, I just did a video about leather breeches, so that's just dried green beans. You'll have to go watch that if you haven't. Peaked means you look sick or you look pale if you're peaked today. A dodger is a piece of bread, so if you'd like a dodger to eat. And did you ever scrooch anyone? Scrooch means hug up tight, so maybe you hug with your sweetheart, that's scrooching. But it's also like like I would say to the girl, scrooch over, I want to sit with you, I want to sit on the couch, make room for me, really is what I'm saying. There's side-goggling, anti-goggling, and cattywampus that all kind of mean crooked. Like if something's on that picture's anti-goggling or side-goggling on the wall, you need to straighten it up. Those are, I rarely hear those today though, but those are just, who couldn't like those words. Arsh means Irish. That's just a corruption of the word Irish, but I grew up with that one with Pap and Granny saying arsh potato. Do you want arsh tater for supper or a sweet potato or sweet tater? So arsh, that's probably one of my favorites. I don't know why, probably just because I can hear Granny and Pat both in my head saying it. Another one is gom. So to make a gom, you make a mess. A lot of times it's said with mess. Granny would tell the girls when they were little, they loved to go in the bathroom, and really they'd turn the water on, but I'm not sure they actually used any soap to wash their hands when they were supposed to be in there scrubbing up for dinner. They'd just be in there making a mess, but she'd tell them, don't be in there gomming and messing, I'll have to clean that up. She'd get on to them and tell them that. But sometimes the Appalachian language is hard to understand for people that are not from here. One of the ones that's often wrote about, if you do a quick Google, you'll probably find it, is I don't care to. So for example, I don't care to in a sentence for me would be like if Granny said, when you're in town next week, would you pick this up for me? If you'll go by there and get my prescription or something, I'd say, no, I don't care to, I will. Well, what I mean is that won't bother me a bit. I don't mind a bit, I'll go get it. But to other people, it sounds like, well, I don't care to, I'm not going to do it. So a funny story about that, one of the first bosses I ever had years ago when I was just a teenager, she said when she first moved to this area, she wanted to make friends with her neighbors, of course, and she said she seen one of her neighbor ladies at the little general store there at Fireses Creek, and she said, would you like to go into town and get something to eat? We could go eat. And she said, the lady said, I don't care to. Yeah, well, Doris thought she meant I don't care to, I'm not interested. So she just drove off and left her standing there, which later they laughed about it, but that was one of the things she had to learn. No, we mean I don't care to, like, sure, I don't mind, it won't put me out, but we say I don't care to, which does sound weird when you think about it. Another funny one like that is one of my fellow staff members. When she first moved here, she said, when I first moved here, one of the things that threw me that I never understood is so that if I was talking and then somebody didn't hear me and they said, do what? And she said, I just couldn't understand what they wanted me to do, that's real common. If I hear you say something and I don't understand it, I'm going to say, do what? To try to get you to say it again. And she said, I was just left thinking, what am I supposed to do? What do they think I need to do? She just didn't get it until she'd been here long enough, she figured out what they meant. But that's an interesting one. One that on the Blind Pig and the Acorn one time that I confused people with years ago, I was writing about something and I said Pap swarped the car into the briars to teach Steve a lesson, my older brother. And people was like, what do you mean he swarped the car? That doesn't make any sense. Well, first I thought, well, he swarped the car. That's what I mean. But then I had to think about it like, okay, now I have to tell exactly what he did. So Pap was driving down the road, and he drove out into, made a curve that really wasn't there, kind of drove to the edge of the road or even out of the road a little bit so that his car was closer to the briars, and Steve was leaning his hands out with his arms and hands out, and Pap swarped him into the briars, so the briars, hit Steve. Sounds kind of mean, but it really wasn't. And in those days, that was the days when no seat belts. Kids didn't wear seat belts. We stood up in the back seat all the time, and all the windows were always down because our cars never had air conditioning. So Steve was leaning way out, and Pap had told him to quit doing that, and he wouldn't quit. So that was Pap's way of kind of teaching him, look, this is not only can you get briars up and down your arms, you may fall out, you better stop. Anyway, but Pap swarped the car. Of course, you can swarp somebody with a rope or a hickory or something like that. That's another use for swarp. But anyway, that was one that confused people. over the years I've had people tell me, well, that's not just Appalachian. I hear that word where I live too. And they're right. Those people are right. Language is fluid. It moves and it changes, and we live in one area and we take it with us to that area. Our grandparents or our parents do the same. And that's how language continues, is that we pass it down through those generations, even if that generation moved to a different part of the country. So those people are all right. These things, Appalachia doesn't have a lockbox or something where we lock in all these unique words. They move around with people, and so you will hear some of these words in other areas. I think they just are more common in Appalachia because of our isolated nature. Of people, you know, and of course today we're not as isolated. I can in 2 hours I could get on a plane and go anywhere I wanted to go. But still, the sense of place that most Appalachians have causes them to stay in that same general area. For my family, the Wilsons have been in Western North Carolina for 9 generations. That's a lot of Wilsons. That's a lot of people living in that same general area, passing down those same traditions, those same words. So that's why sometimes the accents and the usage of the words, why they hold on and why they're connected, or people think of Appalachia or the South when they hear them. That's just what that is. But they do exist in other places. I totally agree with people that say that. And one of my favorite examples of that is an old saying. When I first met my husband years ago, we've been married 26 years. It's a long time ago. His mother, I noticed that when she would serve supper, she would say, "grab and growl." Well, I thought, ain't that cute, you know. She probably grew up with her family saying it or whatever. You know, I just didn't give it much thought, but I knew Miss Cindy always said grab and growl. Well, at some point, I was looking in one of my Appalachian books or researching, and I found grab and growl. It was a saying. I thought, oh my gosh, other people said it. It wasn't just Miss Cindy's family. Other people, enough people said it that it was actually documented as a phrase, grab and growl, before you served, you know, breakfast, dinner, or supper. Anyway, so I wrote about it on The Blind Pig and the Acorn. It's been many years back. And but several years after I had written about it, I got an email from a gentleman who lived in the Pacific Northwest, and he said that his wife had said grab and growl. They'd been married, you know, 30, 40 years, whatever, and she'd been saying that their whole marriage, and he'd always teased her about it. And she told him, she said, I'm not the only person that says it. There's other people that say it, and her grandmother said it. Well, he said today our grown daughter come over to eat with us, and as usual, my wife said grab and growl, and as usual, we teased her about it. And again, she said other people say it. I'm not the only one. And he thought, I'll find out. He said, so I did a quick Google, and what did I find but your website talking about the exact saying that she's been saying for the last, you know, 40 years of our marriage. So, and he said it makes sense. You're talking about Appalachia. Her grandparents were from Appalachia, and then they relocated to the, you know, Pacific Northwest, and that's where her parents were raised, and then where she was raised, or one of her parents, whichever one. Anyway, so there's an example, and I hope that lady's and that gentleman, I hope their kids continue to say that. You know, what a piece of their heritage that is passed down through those generations. Even though her family, you know, teased her about it, she just kept saying it, grab and growl. I think that's the best story. But that's why language is so fascinating to me. I hope you enjoyed this video about Appalachian language. You can probably tell it's one of my favorite things to talk about. Hopefully we can do more videos in the future. And I hope you'll subscribe to my channel, share this video with your friends and neighbors, and mostly I just hope you'll drop back by often as I celebrate Appalachia.